Hey guys, so you should have just watched the video about the laws of inheritance, and you also should have filled out that chart that was talking about the definition, the picture example, and the wording example along with the definition. So what we're going to do is we're going to essentially do the same thing. We're just going to review it in this format just in case you want to write down some extra notes. So the laws of inheritance were established by a geneticist named Gregor Mendel. Who we have talked about several times in our recent lessons, and that was established in the 1800s. He discovered these principles through crossbreeding pea plants, which you learned all about in lesson 1 of your chapter 2 work. Now, he established 3 different laws of inheritance: the law of segregation, the law of independent assortment, and the law of dominance. What we're going to do is we're going to break each of these down and determine exactly what they are and give some examples of these. So the law of segregation says that during gamete formation, the alleles of each gene separate from each other. And that results in the fact that each gamete will only have one allele for each gene. So just to further elaborate on this, if we have, if we're looking at a diploid cell for a human, remember a diploid cell means a cell with a full amount of chromosomes, which would mean 46 in humans. And let's just say, so we have 2 chromosomes, we have a dominant allele for one, a recessive allele for another. And we said that this is a diploid somatic cell. And what we're tracking with those alleles, we are tracking hair color. We could really track anything. We're going to track hair color, in which dominant is brown and recessive is red. So what happens is when this diploid cell undergoes meiosis, remember that we create 4 different daughter cells, and each of those daughter cells has half the amount of the original chromosome count. And so instead of having 2 alleles, as in the dominant and the recessive allele for this particular gene of hair color, we're only going to sort 1 allele for each cell that is created. So as you remember, we're creating 4 cells through meiosis, and through the process of cytokinesis and splitting those sister chromatids and homologous pairs, you're going to end with 4 daughter cells that have different alleles in them. So 2 of them will have dominant alleles, 2 of them will have the recessive allele pairs. Keep in mind that these will be matched up with all the other types of alleles that are found in this person's cell. So what we have made here, once again, these are haploid gametes. And they have 1 allele for each gene. And remember, if a female is creating gametes, they're making eggs. If a male is creating gametes, they are making sperm. So an example of this would be, let's see, even if mom does not express, mean physically show, red hair, she can still pass it down. to her offspring. Because we know that looking at her egg cells here, she could either pass down brown hair alleles right here, or she could pass down red hair alleles. So she can pass on red or brown alleles. But she cannot pass them both at the same time because remember, we only have one allele in a haploid gamete cell. Okay, let's move on to our next law. Our next law is the law of independent assortment. And this means that genes for different traits sort independently of each other in gamete formation. And this means it is random possibilities. So let's talk about what we mean by this. So once again, if we look at a diploid cell, we know that we are looking, once again, it's called a somatic diploid cell. Now, if we're looking at the somatic diploid cell, we know that we have two alleles for each gene. So if we wanted to track hair color, we know that we have dominant is brown, recessive is red. Let's say we also want to track height, in which dominant is tall, recessive is short. And then let's also track eye color, in which dominant is brown, recessive is blue. Okay, so looking at this somatic diploid cell, we're going to have two alleles for each of these traits. And let's just say that this particular person's diploid cell, they are heterozygous for hair. So they'll have brown hair, but they're carrying the red hair allele. We'll say that they are heterozygous for height. So they're tall, but they're carrying the short person allele. And let's say that they are also, let's change this to a D just to make it easier to see up here. We're also going to make them heterozygous for eye color. So they have brown eyes, but they're still carrying that blue eye allele right there. So once again, this is talking about in-gamete formation. So once again, we're going through meiosis and we're making these four genetically different cells. And these alleles are going to be randomly assorted into these cells. So the only two alleles that we can give for hair are dominant and recessive. But we also know that we have dominant and recessive alleles for height. So we could have dominant, recessive, dominant, recessive. It doesn't particularly matter because remember, these are all random. And over here for eye color, we could give dominant alleles or we could give recessive alleles. So here we have a completely different variety of four gametes that have been created here with a different assortment of these traits. And that is all because of the law of independent assortment. Just because we have brown hair doesn't mean that we're also going to be tall and have brown eyes. Just because we have red hair doesn't mean that we're also going to be short and have blue eyes. All of these things can be arranged differently. So an example of this is, let's say, Dina and her sister both have red hair. But Dina's eyes are blue, while her sisters are brown. So once again, just because they both had red hair doesn't mean that they both have to have the same eye color, because the arrangement of these alleles right here is completely random. Okay, let's look at our third and final law here. This is the law of dominance, and this is usually the easiest one to catch on to. So with the law of dominance, we know that some alleles are dominant, while other alleles are recessive. And we also know that any organism with at least one dominant allele will express a dominant phenotype. And that's even if there's a recessive allele. Oh no. Sorry, it cut off there. So let's look at this. If we're going to track the hair color trait, or hair type, let's just do hair type since we're using a different color. So hair type, in which dominant is curly and recessive is straight. And we want to look at the genotype and the phenotype. Remember, genotype is dealing with the genetic expression and the phenotype is dealing with the physical expression. So we have three different possible genotypes that we could have. We could have homozygous dominant, we could have heterozygous, we also have homozygous recessive. So homo recessive, hetero, and homozygous dominant. If you're having trouble with those still, go back and look at the alleles, types, and dominance video. So now we determine what phenotype is going to match these genotypes. So in homozygous dominant, the only possibility for the phenotype is the dominant allele, which is curly. So we're going to have a little person with super curly hair. Don't judge. I'm an artiste. Okay? So we also have heterozygous allele pairing, which even though it's paired with this recessive allele, this dominant allele is going to mask it and cover it up, act like it's not even there in the phenotype. So we're still going to have a person with super curly hair in the phenotype, just as if that recessive allele wasn't even there. And then we get to homozygous recessive allele pairing. And because there is no dominant allele to mask the straight hair allele, they are going to have straight hair. Now even remember, even if it had just one dominant allele, like there's two right here and one right here, they both presented the dominant phenotype, but this one represented the recessive phenotype. So let's look at an example of this. We have Tina, who has curly hair, and Tim have a straight-haired kid. We also know that Tim is also curly. And we want to know, is this possible? For two people with curly hair to have a child with straight hair? And we know that the answer to that is yes. And the reason being is because they can carry recessive allele, 4 straight here, without expressing it physically. And once again, we call those carriers of a trait. So that wraps up our discussion for the 3 laws of Mendelian inheritance. If you have any questions about these, please send me a message on Schoology, and also refer back to the laws of inheritance video that has also been posted. Have a great day.